Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. Today I'm just going to be doing a little roundup of the books I've been reading this week, and also just worth noting at this point, just because I realise it's now been a surprising amount of time, I will be trying to get the live stream sorted fairly soon. Thank you all for people who have submitted questions. Please do go and add those in if you still have questions you want to add for that. But I'm trying to work out just when I can do the live stream. Work's been chaotic and busy, so I have barely had a time to really sit down and think. So yes, that will be coming before long. Watch this space. But on to the books that I've been reading this week, and let's get talking about them. In a move that will surprise absolutely nobody, there will be 2 International Booker shortlisted books on this and a Women's Prize longlisted book on this as well. But let's start off with some other books that were not those. So first up, we have Fellowship Point by Alice Elliott Dark. And I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a really beautifully told tale. So the idea behind this book essentially is the story of an author who, at least sort of towards the beginning of the book, we see her being approached to tell her memoir, to basically do her memoirs and to tell this sort of long story of how she came to be who she was. And she is the author in this book. This fictional author is the author of a series of very popular children's books, or at least books that sort of focus around these young people. And so a large part of, for many people, they've grown up with these books. They've had them as a really fundamental part of their lives. There's this sort of plucky young girl at the heart of it. And so loads of people want to really know, what was the inspiration behind this? What was the reason why, how did this book come to pass, and how much of that is about your own life? And the author resists a lot of this by talking about, well, why do people need to know about my personal life? I'm telling these stories, and these stories can stand for themselves. There are parts in them that are real to my life, parts that aren't, and I don't have to give you all of the answers to those questions. And so there's this really great passage that is a sort of to and fro of sort of letters between this agent, sort of literary agent, and the author, where the agent's saying, hey, maybe we could think about this, and the author's saying, hey, look, I'm in my 80s, I don't need to be doing all this. What is your insistence? Is this just for money because I'm fine? Is it just for this? Well, I don't need to do that. And there's this really great exchange, but at the heart of what that does in the book, I think is really fun and really clever, is then sort of grounds so much of the other discussion of, we then as the audience become these sort of almost a double reader in some ways. We're not only reading the story that's being told here, we're also reading it how a reader in that world might experience those words, and what they might be trying to unpick about the author's life from that as well. Which I thought was really well done and really clever and really interesting. And I just overall really enjoyed what this book did. It's just a really warm-hearted, thoughtful book that looks a lot at these family relationships, and particularly the sort of the things that came to pass to make this author who she was. And thank you to the commenter who suggested this. This was a really lovely book to pick up and to try, so thank you. Despite its length, I think it's really good. I think it's a book that I listened to as an audiobook, and having that sort of wash over me while I was walking around was lovely. Next up, I read Travis Alabanza's None of the Above. And this is a book I'd been hearing about and wanting to read for a little while. Essentially, this is a non-fiction book where Travis Alabanza talks about being non-binary, and basically talks about existing outside of sort of typical male-female binary divisions, both in terms of clothing, in terms of presentation, in terms of how they think about themselves, all of these sorts of things. And I thought it was a really warm-hearted book, a really clever and intelligent book, because Travis spends a lot of time talking about how their feelings of their gender are so personal to them, and so much part of how they see themselves within the world, that actually it's quite strange to then enter into these theoretical discussions with other people who are, debunking it or whatever, because for them, well, why do we need to go into this? This is something I experience in a personal way. That doesn't affect you. This is how I do this. If I want to wear whatever, I can, and that doesn't really affect you. And so actually I think so much of this book was so interesting for how it approaches, yeah, sort of some of those interpersonal relationships that come out of this. So actually, what does it look like if, you know, these discussions of gender and identity, how does that impact things around relationships and sex and just day-to-day safety and all these other things. But I think what is really quite interesting about this book as well is it feels like it looks forward to kind of a sort of a future utopia, or a sort of vision of what it could look like in the future if we cared a bit less about some of this. And for example, there's a moment where they talk about somebody they meet, this man who comes to their shows, who sort of almost needs the shows as a way of building up the courage to wear nail polish, for example, or to feel about themselves a certain way. And, you know, I just think it's a really warm-hearted book in how it approaches that. I think it could so easily be more of a polemic, which, you know, nothing wrong with that either. But I think what's nice about this book is it's such a personal approach to looking at some of these topics. Looking now at the International Women's Prize, I then read Wandering Souls by Cecile. And this book I just thought was really gorgeous in so many ways. It talks about a Vietnamese family who emigrate from Vietnam, and under quite difficult circumstances as well, especially because there are sort of things around the Vietnam War and around various other things. And this family sort of find themselves kind of just constantly moving around, or constantly trying to establish who they are in a new place. So some of the family moved to the US, and we hear from what that looks like for them. We have some of the family who moved to the UK, and we sort of learn a bit about what that looks like for them. And I thought the UK passages it almost was quite eerie for me, because a lot of their experiences of being in the UK, this family, are in South London, often referencing places not far from me. And it sort of really brings it home in a really interesting way. Partly because I think so many narratives around Vietnam and immigration tend to be about the US and Vietnam, which makes sense, as there's, you know, such a big relationship between those countries because of the war. To kind of read about the UK context was really interesting, first and foremost, but then also, for example, Margaret Thatcher looms large over this book. We have a letter from her in the book. I'm assuming a fictionalized letter, but sort of talking about her government's commitment to taking a certain number of refugees from Vietnam. But then in the book, it also then explores more broadly about how that didn't always come to pass. How, you know, Thatcher might say this thing in this letter to this family, or she might say a certain thing in Parliament or to the public, but sometimes the reality was very different. So I just really appreciated how this book deals with the real horrors and complexities of moving lives, you know, across the world and trying to start somewhere new, the violence and trauma that those families would have experienced. But then also looks at this, you know, you get these little moments of the family standing together and laughing in the kitchen, or one of them trying to make a certain food item to feel a bit more connected to home, and all of these little things that were just so tender and so beautiful. And yeah, I just think it's a really gorgeous book, and really well handled, really sensitively done. Then we get onto the International Booker books, and just sort of as it had happened, of the ones I had left to read, a few of them ended up on the shortlist. So these just were the ones I ended up reading next, really. The first being Whale by Cheon Myeong-Kwan, and translated by Kim Chi-young. This is a book that I had mixed feelings towards, and I've done a separate review on it as well. I suppose my mixedness of feelings is about It's weird. At turns, I found this book really funny and really clever, and it sort of satirizes this sort of fairy tale structure of sort of, and first, reader, we'll go and do this, and next you might be thinking blah blah blah. But I think I then found some of the content of the book a bit more frustrating in a few other ways. So sometimes I think I just found the stories a bit circular and kind of didn't really feel like it was going anywhere. At times I just didn't really like the portrayal of women in the book. But then at other times it was really strange because it would pull something back and I would find it really clever again. And, you know, the way the book draws towards an end, I thought was really effective. Yeah, so you've kind of got these I haven't even talked about what the book was. So the book is sort of almost interconnected short stories, and stories is kind of not really the right term for it. If you almost approach the whole thing as being like a book of fables, but those fables are all linked together, that's kind of more like it. So, for example, there is a woman who can talk to bees, and there is a woman who develops a new way of making bricks and sort of makes a lot of money for herself and her village, and you know these people then also interact in various other ways, and we as a book, you know, the book then can look at how they're remembered and how, you know, how we look back on certain groups, and so I thought that sort of side of things was really interesting, and occasionally I'd really just love what the book was going for. I think at times I just found it a bit edgy for edgy's sake, in the sense of like, oh, look, we're doing this thing, and look, we've got this fable about this person who's like this. And I don't know, occasionally it just didn't land for me. So it was a bit of a mixed one. I think there's so much that's interesting about it. I just also, I don't know, I never fully was able to just really connect in a way that made me love it. I think I just always felt a little bit held back, and just when I was starting to like it, something would happen that would frustrate me again. But there we go. I can see why a lot of people would really enjoy this. It's just, I don't think it landed for me personally. And last but not least, we have Standing Heavy by GauZ, and translated by Frank Wynne. And this is also on the Booker shortlist, and this one I had a better reaction to. So the core idea of this book is that it's sort of split into several sections by different decades. So we've got the sort of 60s, 90s and 2010s. And Standing Heavy, the title, refers to a guard, to sort of a security guard. So it's the idea of you are standing heavy, you are the heavy who is sort of standing there policing what's going on and sort of monitoring what's going on. And what I really appreciated about that is the way that the security guard, a figure who we don't really see as much of in literature, it serves as a really useful function in books, right? Because they are able to sit back and watch everything going on in a way that's really useful for a reader. For readers, we sit there and we watch how a book is taking place, right? We want the author to be sort of in those shoes of observing details, noting them down, which is what a security guard does. And so actually I think it's really clever how this book uses a security guard to do that, which, you know, by itself would have been interesting, but then uses that to also place a bit of to sort of as a form of being able to make criticisms, I guess, of sort of the French structure around, this sort of social structure around race, class, poverty, around so many other things. So, for example, the security guard is watching people go by, but he's also watching how, for example, certain people are treated more as criminals than others, particularly people who are North African, or who come from sort of Middle Eastern countries, how all of those people are seen as they're sort of more criminalized in other people's eyes, and equally he sees how, you know, various people, particularly white, affluent Parisians, move through the world in a way that is very different. And so he, as a security guard, is in this strange role because he's a black man, often there to police, in theory, other people of color around him, which puts him in a strange role of sort of what that looks like societally. And I found those passages really, really interesting, especially. We've then got a lot of other conversations around immigration and integration and so many other things. So we've got a set of characters who come in and out of this sort of narrative. Some people who are planning on starting their lives and, really making a name for themselves in France and really, being able to send money back home, all those sorts of things. We've then got, other people who come in during this sort of golden age era and are there to kind of really try and do what they, to kind of have this impressive life. But the security guard in some ways is this grounding force that kind of reminds us that it hasn't all worked, that here we are in the 2010s and it's not all gone well. We're not really where we thought we would be and everybody is struggling. So yeah, I think it's really clever how this book grounds so many of those things. And on that note, because I'll probably do a separate video on that, I'm going to end that here, but really great to talk about these books for this week. I've had an interesting reading week. It's been incredibly busy, so I've just it's been on various bits of public transport, just in and out of work. It's been an intense week, but I shall rest. It's a long weekend here in the UK, so I'm going to pass out and have a very nice time with lots of snacks and a dog. I've been Bob the Booker. Take care, and I hope you're having a good week. Bye-bye.